Greetings and assalamu alaikum. My name is Shua, and you are watching Light Up with Shua, a weekly podcast on conscious living and parenting. This is episode 93 with emotional mastery expert Ilene Dillon. Her website link will be in my show notes, and more details about what we talked in my show notes. But you can go to emotionalmasteryforlife.com. This is her website. Hope you will send me your feedback or comments about this episode or any other episode. Please do visit lightupwithshua.com, my website, and you can send your comments through that also. You can find me on iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Castbox, and you can watch on YouTube or the Groton channel. And of course, you have my links on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So, without delaying anymore, please watch or listen to this podcast and let me know what you think. Have a wonderful week. Take care.
Let me thank you for putting that face into today's world because, my husband was a brain surgeon. And when I was dating him, I suddenly realized I'm dating a brain surgeon. So I went to him and said, could I ever see you do a brain surgery? And he said, I always wanted a woman I'm involved with to see me do brain surgery. So I actually got into the operating room with him 4 times to see him do brain surgery. And I mean in the operating room, looking over his shoulder, right?
Wow.
And the one most powerful thing that hit me in those 4 operations is that once he cut under the skin, everybody was the same color. And I just stood there and wished that everybody could see that, And I think we need more of that in our world. And so thank you, because what you're doing is you're taking the risk somewhat in our culture right now of putting out a face to show your humanity. And that's what we really need. So thank you for doing that.
And thank you for appreciating and acknowledging.
Great. And let me just say that many times I thought over the 13 years of giving up my radio program, and what I did when I was doing my show, it was focused on emotions and the power and importance of emotions. Which means I could talk with anybody about almost anything. The point for me is that I was talking with people who were on the cutting edge, and every week I would read their book. And I made up my own questions and asked them and talked to them for an hour, and I finally realized the program was for me. If somebody else learned something, that was great. But the program is for me.
Exactly.
That's the part I wanted to share with you.
Yes.
When I was a therapist years ago, I used to say, people would bring their teenagers in for therapy because they were having trouble with them. And after they would leave, I would go, this is the most amazing thing. Just about 15 years ago, these parents were the same age as the children they're bringing to me. And it's like they have amnesia for what happened 15 years ago.
Exactly.
So what I say to my grandchildren is that people who are older than they are have already had their opportunity to be here on the earth for a while, make their decisions, make their mistakes, do their learning. And that if somebody older than they are is having issues that may compromise that child's life, the child needs to concentrate on developing their own life and not on taking care of that parent or that person or that relative or whoever. That each of us, in my view, we've each come here to the earth to learn, and compromising our learning is one of the worst things we can do for ourselves.
Yeah.
And the people that are in our lives, including parents who are really difficult, like you were talking about, those people are teachers, and they may be harsher teachers, being narcissistic, more challenging. But as I told this young person in my family, you're young. If you learn to deal with a narcissistic parent, you will be able to, you probably won't even run into narcissistic people in your life because you would have done the learning already,
Yeah.
right?
The most,
But if you
yeah, it is quite hard to deal
but
with.
if you
Yeah.
do learn, then and other people do show up, you'll know how to deal with them, right? So each person who shows up in our life is our guru. They're our teacher.
Yep.
Yes, and it's awfully difficult to step out of the system because generally, if it's a parent, for example, we grew up in that system.
Yep.
So it's really hard for us. My parents' system was very powerful. As an adult who'd been on my own for a while, I went back to visit. It took me only 3 hours to get sucked back into their system. And I found every 2 hours I had to go outside and go for a walk just to remember who I was. I also took pictures with me of my everyday life that I lived, so I could remember
reinforce
who I was.
Yeah.
So we get sucked
that's how
in.
powerful it is. Yep.
Yeah, it's called the family system in family therapy, and families have that system.
Yeah.
So it's not a terrible thing, but our drive to be independent is really to give us space so we can see our own parameters.
Yeah, have our own system going on, right?
Right. Because that's what we come here to do. I think it's Esther Hicks who's talking about, we come here to identify our wants and develop them. And interestingly, what she says is one of the best ways to find out what we want in life is to discover what we really don't want in life.
Yes, that's exactly. Yep. That's a good way to say it. Thank you. Thank you so much. That is so rich.
And things move faster now. That's part of it. Things move faster. And we don't have as much experience. When I was a child, I could go out in the woods and play for hours with my sister.
And be safe also. That's another thing.
And be safe, right? Yeah. Now, children have very little opportunity to be away from adults at all, which I think is a terrible loss. Yeah. And then we don't teach our children to be responsible for their own lives. Well, I don't know if I'll say that's it, but it's one big thing.
One of the big things.
Responsibility is one of the building blocks of self-esteem. And so what we're really doing when we don't ask our children to take responsibility for their lives is robbing them of one of the 4 main building blocks of self-esteem.
Okay.
So even if children stay around us all the time, we can ask them to be responsible. We can ask them to do family chores, which a lot of children are not asked to do. We can put our child in charge of caring for an animal or a plant, which we don't often ask our children to do. We can ask our children to, here's something that I didn't know about, and a friend of mine put me onto it. When my son was 5 and my daughter was 12, I was a single parent and I was feeling totally overwhelmed. So I went to my friend and said, "Can you give me any advice on what I can do differently?" And she said, "Yeah, you need to stop making so many trips to the grocery store. In fact, you need to plan your meals more, and your children need to start making family meals." And that involves them planning what they want, going to the grocery store and buying doing the cooking, serving, and doing the cleanup. And I said, "But my son is only 5 years old." And she said, "There are things he can cook.
Or do.
So I went back to my children and I told them, this was my son's godmother who told me this. I told them of her suggestion and asked if they'd like to try it. And they both said yes, which was amazing. Okay. So my son's first meal was 2 baked potatoes made in the microwave with grated cheese. That's what we ate for dinner, which, we had protein, and he eventually became the egg and souffle person in the family. He really made a lot of wonderful dishes. My daughter, who was much older, was immediately interested in learning to make Julia Child homemade mushroom soup and homemade onion soup, right? So the bottom line is it took about 2 years for my son at 5 to grow into being able to make meals on his own. But By the time he was 7, 3 nights a week, I sat in my living room and read the paper while my children made the meal.
So nobody said you are doing the child labor or or
I did.
forcing
I
them.
didn't ask. I didn't ask.
Or people like,
No,
oh, this is so young and you're
but
making.
yeah, but it's so young. But the children were thrilled with
Yes, yes.
themselves,
So
and
it's
they
nothing
also,
wrong. I guess that's what it is. The changing is like they just have to read the books and go to school and that's it. I mean, we are making them.
well, that's not really preparing them for real
Yes,
life, is it?
exactly, exactly.
My
Because we used
daughter,
to do everything. I used to do so many things around the house.
yeah, well, that's what women were taught to do.
Yeah.
And as a single parent, that was one of the advantages of being a single parent. I couldn't do everything, so I had to call on my kids. And
Mm,
I, but I never would have thought of this. But this brought so many other
mm,
things. My son was 6, and he made a meal, and he served it, and my daughter turned her nose up at it. And he looked at her, and he said, "That really hurts my feelings. I worked really hard to make this meal
mm.
and to make it for you. And I put my love into it, and you're making a face at it, and it really hurts my feelings."
Oh,
Right?
yes,
What a lesson
yes.
for all of us.
I
Well,
mean, I
so
mean,
my
it's.
daughter
I don't
grew
know.
up to develop a business
Hmm.
that served people food, right? And my son is has at times been a stay-at-home dad and has been the primary meal preparer. But not only that, in his younger days, one of the ways he loved his friends was to buy food and go to their house and cook for them.
Wow, nice. So
Okay,
that it gave them some that
it
foundation.
gave
Yeah,
them lots of wonderful things.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so we had this idea that giving children, years ago I went to a conference in California on building children's self-esteem. And like you were saying,
Mm.
you know, even if they showed up, you give them a certificate or you give them
Yeah, it's too
a
much.
little
Yeah,
statue or something.
little.
And even then, and this was back in the 70s, even then, I was bothered by this because I knew that this is not what causes self-esteem to grow.
Mm.
What causes there are 7 building blocks of self-esteem that
Yes,
I
please.
will be writing a book about
Can
self-esteem
you
as
share
well.
some?
Well, no, there are 4 main building blocks. I will
Okay.
share the 4 main building
All
blocks.
right.
They are honesty, responsibility, spontaneity, and integrity. And the idea is that if you meet a person who has high self esteem, you will see these qualities in them. So if you wish to build high self esteem, you develop these qualities in
Mm.
yourself. Now, honesty is not about, honestly, I'll tell you, your hair is a mess. It's about honesty with myself.
Mm.
You know, am I okay with this? Do I feel good about this? Do I
Mm.
feel good about what I said? Being honest with myself.
Mm.
Responsibility is about learning that my life is up to me. I'm a co creator of my life, the way I look at it. I'm a co creator of my life on a spiritual level. And therefore, what happens in my life and where I go with my life is up to me. And as I learned it, the more responsibility I can take, the better I'm going to feel about myself. One of the strange little things that I learned is being in an office or whatever, and people use up all the toilet paper on the roll and don't replace it.
Mm.
And I took that as an interesting little point of responsibility. Whenever I go into a bathroom, I go, oh, goody, somebody forgot to put the toilet paper roll on, and I would put it on, right? So it comes down to just taking whatever responsibility is there and taking joy in it.
Yes,
And responsibility gives you the opportunity then to have more choice. When you're responsible, you can have more choice,
that's true.
all
Mm.
right?
Kind of.
Because I'm building my own self-esteem. I'm just happy to be taking this responsibility, right? So I'm honest. I'm responsible. Now
How does spontaneity come in? Yeah.
well, spontaneity is easier for children, but spontaneity means I'm living from my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not holding myself back. That's what's important about it. And then when I live with honesty, responsibility in the moment, that helps me develop integrity. If you go back, integrity is about living according to your own ideals and principles. And if you go back to the story I told you about my son stealing the candy bar, he developed integrity through that process because he developed his own principle that I'm going to listen to my own voice and not to voices coming from outside of me. And that's what happened when I left him with the responsibility and the consequence of what he had, what choice he'd made. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, definitely.
So those are just the four main ones. I always forget one of them. The other is not deliberately hurting others, listening to your inner voices, and and one more that I tend to forget. I don't know why.
Well, we will read in your book.
Yes, definitely.
Let's keep that as a teaser.
Anybody who's watching, I have something written down. If they want to email me, Ilene, Ilene at emotionalmasteryforlife.com. Ilene at emotionalmasteryforlife.com. I will send you a list of these 7 building blocks of self-esteem.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
sure.
I'll put your link definitely in your in the show notes and all. So I'll have your links there.
Great. So we want to build responsibility in our children just by letting them have the consequences of the choices they make. Plus, it makes parenting so much easier. When my children were growing up, they would sometimes make the same error over and over again, and I would try to get them to straighten out, and they wouldn't do it. And I came up with something one time. I said, so far, the decisions you've been making have been creating consequences with pain. These consequences are painful. And so far, I've been taking those consequences. I've been the one who's in pain. And I want you to know from now on, I'm not taking those consequences anymore. If you keep doing what you're doing, that pain's going to come back on you. And of course, they would not change. But when the consequences came and the pain was there and they were complaining about it, I would say, it's just too bad that you're making that choice. I feel terrible for you that you're in pain, but I see that you're definitely deciding not to make the change you need to make. So good luck with that.